The hallway lay drowned in silence, deep and unnatural, like the stillness that presses against the skin before a thunderstorm. Fluorescent lights flickered above the linoleum, washing everything in a strange, colorless glow. Carts stood abandoned by the nurse's station, and the usual hum of late-night chatter was missing. No patient calls, no footsteps, no voices behind closed doors. The air felt thick, clinging to every surface, heavy with a tension that should not have belonged in a place so used to the ebb and flow of life and death. Down the long corridor, tucked beneath the exit sign that always hummed, the morgue door sat slightly ajar. It should have been locked. It was always locked at this hour. The janitor paused, pushing his cart slower, rubber wheels nearly silent as they crossed the muted tiles. He glanced at the green glow of the clock on the wall, just past 3 a.m., the time when the building usually felt most hollow. But tonight was different. Tonight the emptiness crawled, as if unseen eyes pressed against the walls, watching the living move among the shadows of the dead. He stopped a few feet from the morgue, staring at the thin seam of darkness where the door swung open. Somewhere deeper inside, a chill leaked out, cool and unnatural, brushing his arms with a prickling cold that didn't come from the air conditioning. Hesitant, he listened. It was too quiet, so quiet that his own heartbeat became the only thing left to count on. He'd worked the night shift at Massachusetts General Hospital for years, long enough that the building felt like a second home, one with endless corridors, flickering lights, and secrets tucked behind every thick door. Lately, things had changed. More staff called out sick. Faces he once knew disappeared from the schedule, replaced by silence or strangers who never met his eyes. That's why he was here, alone tonight, covering extra hours on a skeleton crew. Some shifts felt manageable, filled with the simple rhythm of bucket and mop, and others, like this one, stretched on like an endless tunnel. Even the radio on his cart, usually a reliable companion, crackled and faded, offering only static. He learned to keep to his routines: empty trash, wipe counters, replace liners, mop under the fluorescent buzz. It gave him purpose, something quiet and solid in the restless dark. But tonight, the familiar pattern felt off, punctured by the open morgue door and the absence of anyone. A nurse finishing paperwork, a doctor lost in thought. The janitor wondered if it was just the hour, or if, in taking on these extra shifts, he'd stepped into something that went deeper than tiredness. The hallway was too empty, and in that emptiness, something unseen seemed to wait. Just as he gathered courage to step closer to the morgue door, his shoe nudged something on the floor. He looked down and saw a plain manila folder lying awkwardly against the baseboard, halfway into the strip of shadow spilling from inside. It was a patient file, the kind that should never leave the nurse's station or the record room. The janitor bent slowly and picked it up, feeling the slick paper ice cold under his palm, colder than the rest of the air in the hallway. He squinted at the name typed in block letters: Marin, Eleanor. The name meant nothing to him, though he prided himself on remembering every last person who'd passed through his shift, even after all these years. The folder's contents were thin, barely more than a single page and a photo clipped to the corner. The woman in the picture stared hollow-eyed, her hair flat against her cheeks, looking beyond the camera, as if she saw something waiting just over the photographer's shoulder. The janitor glanced around quickly, feeling exposed and somehow unwelcome, his heartbeat tipping faster. He thought about bringing the file back to the records room, but the idea of turning his back on the morgue's open door felt wrong. And stranger still, he was certain there had never been a patient named Eleanor Marin in the hospital, not while he'd been here, not ever. He balanced the strange file in one hand and fished his phone from his pocket with the other, thumbing the speed dial for the nurse's station. It rang once, then twice, before the signal dropped away with a flat, hollow beep. He tried again, moving down the hallway in search of a stronger connection, but each time the call ended before anyone could pick up. Even the wall-mounted hospital phones, always cold and sticky from use, fell silent when he lifted the receiver. Static filled the line. Then, nothing. The silence pressed in tighter, making the building feel impossibly large and empty, as if he was the last person left awake inside its walls. He glanced over his shoulder at the empty nurses' desks, half expecting to see someone cross the hall and reassure him that the phones just went down sometimes, that everything was fine. But the lights above flickered, the only movement in the stillness. Doubt crept in, winding through his mind. He clutched the manila folder tighter, its chill numbing his fingers, and wondered what else might not be working tonight. The quiet felt dangerous now, as if something in the hospital was purposely keeping him cut off, locking any help or answers just out of reach. With each silent phone and unanswered call, worry pressed tighter around his chest. He decided to seek out help in person, moving quickly but quietly down the corridor, passing rooms that should have been familiar. The janitor pushed through a set of heavy double doors, expecting to enter the staff kitchenette, but found himself standing in a hallway lined with old, unused patient rooms instead. Flickering bulbs cast long shadows over faded room numbers, and for a moment he wondered if he'd stepped into the wrong wing out of pure habit. But every step made the hospital feel less like the place he knew, and more like a maze shifting beneath his feet. He tried another door, marked Supply, hoping to circle back to the main desk, but inside he found only darkness and the faint smell of antiseptic. No shelves, no lights, nothing but empty space stretching farther than any closet should. His confusion sharpened to fear. The janitor backed out, heart racing, and stared at the map posted to the wall, tracing his finger along the routes he'd walked every night for years. None of the halls made sense anymore. Routes twisted into dead ends, and doors led to wings he had never cleaned. The hospital, his second home, had turned foreign and impossible, every path breaking away from the world he knew. He doubled back, heart thudding against his ribs as he retraced each uncertain step toward the morgue. The stillness clung to him, broken only by the soft squelch of his shoes. Then, a new sound pricked the silence, a series of faint footsteps that didn't match the rhythm of his own. They came from near the open morgue door, delicate and slow, as if someone or something was trying not to be heard. The noise stopped whenever he stopped, starting again the moment he moved. His hands gripped the handle of his cart, knuckles pale, eyes darting to the dark seam where the morgue cracked open into the hallway. He paused, listening closely. Air shifted, heavy and unnatural, as if a hidden breath had drawn in nearby. Another soft sound followed, a gentle, almost imperceptible exhale, thick with the cold that rolled out from the open morgue. The janitor squinted, willing his eyes to adjust, searching for even the faintest movement inside. The shadows were deep, his own reflection faintly echoing back at him from the polished tile far below. No one appeared. Still, a prickle ran up his spine, tightening at the back of his neck. Each soft sound seemed meant for him alone. A secret signal passed in the uneasy dark. He forced himself a step closer, peering through the rectangular glass panels set into the morgue door. The inside lights glimmered low and distant, pooling on the linoleum floor beyond a line of empty gurneys. For a long moment, the room looked almost normal, silent and still, chilled beyond comfort, the stainless steel drawers glinting in the glow. But just as he let himself believe he'd imagined the sounds, he saw a shapeshift inside. It wasn't a person. It was a shadow, slim and unnatural, slipping along the far wall in a way the fluorescent lights didn't cause. The shadow moved with a purpose all its own, independent of anything else in the room. It slid behind the cold storage units, stretching and shrinking in a strange, broken rhythm. Never quite fully solid, but heavy enough for him to feel it. The janitor's breath caught. Sweat dotted his brow despite the cold that radiated out the open door. He blinked, and the shadow paused, as if it realized for the first time that it was being watched. It almost seemed to tremble, then drew back, sinking deeper into the morgue's dark corners. The janitor's fear grew roots, anchoring him in place as the sense of being unwanted and unwelcome swelled in the frozen air. He squeezed his eyes shut, clenching the manila folder to his chest. Maybe it was just exhaustion. Too many nights without enough sleep. Too many hours lost under the harsh hospital lights. He remembered what the doctors always said about the night shift. You start seeing things, hearing things that aren't really there. He pulled in a shaky breath, willing his nerves to settle. Shadows weren't dangerous, he told himself, and there's nothing in the morgue except what's supposed to be there. With effort, he turned away from the door and pressed his focus back onto his cart, determined to finish his rounds without letting fear take over. He set the folder on the cart with the cleaning supplies and began wiping down counters and emptying trash bins, making the same practiced motions he'd done for years. His hands shook at first, but the routine brought some comfort, grounding him in something he could control. Still, every so often he would glance over his shoulder at the morgue, its door just barely open, shadows still pressed inside. Each soft squeak of his sneakers on the floor and each clink of a trash lid made him jump, but he forced himself to keep moving, cleaning with desperate care, as though staying busy might be enough to ward off whatever was wrong tonight. He made his way down the hallway, mop in hand, determined to keep to his schedule. Then the lights began to flicker above him, not the normal slow buzz that meant a bulb was about to die, but sharp, erratic flashes that sent long shadows jittering along the walls. Each time the lights snapped off and on, the narrow corridor seemed to shrink and stretch in strange ways. He paused, watching patterns crawl across the linoleum, feeling a cold crawl up his spine. Something about the flickering made it impossible to shake the idea that he wasn't alone, that something was moving in the dark between flashes, just out of sight. As he forced himself onward, passing a large window overlooking the parking lot, he caught a glimpse of his own reflection. For a moment, he barely recognized himself. The tired face, pale and worn, hunched over the mop as if it was the only thing holding him up. But as he moved forward, his reflection lagged behind, staring back a heartbeat too long before finally catching up. He blinked, unsure if it was just a trick of the harsh lights or something more sinister. Suddenly the window felt less like a barrier and more like an open door between his world and another, the world where the silence was never truly empty. The lights steadied for a moment, and in that breath of clarity, he saw something at the end of the hall. Past the nurse's station, just before the shadows swallowed the next corridor, stood a pale figure. It didn't move or make a sound, the kind of stillness that pressed deeper than silence. The janitor froze, mop dangling from his grip, eyes locked on the ghostly shape. It was too far to see clearly, but he knew it was watching him, not just standing by chance, but positioned deliberately, as if it had been waiting for him to notice. He blinked hard, and it was gone, leaving the illusion of emptiness behind. But the feeling lingered, the certainty that eyes followed him, cold and heavy, even when nothing was there. He tried to shake it off, forced himself back to the routine, but each time he glanced down the hall, he caught flashes in the corner of his vision. A pale blur, the outline of a face, the shape of someone poised at the end of the world. His skin tingled with a chill he couldn't scrub away, and every shadow felt inhabited, thick with the sense of something not quite alive but somehow aware of him. The chill burrowed deeper, pulling memories he thought had long faded. Years ago, when he first started at the hospital, a patient had slipped away on his watch. The memory was blurry, shouts echoing off white walls, the crash of running feet, the way the world narrowed to the space between beeping monitors and the panicked rush of hands. He remembered the weight of helplessness, thick in his chest, and the way time seemed to stretch out, every second lasting forever as the doctors tried to bring life back to a body already slipping away. He didn't talk about it, not even to himself. The hospital was a place where loss happened quietly, tucked behind closed doors and handwritten notes. Now, under the harsh fluorescent lights, the sounds and shapes of that night flickered just behind his eyes. He could almost hear the flat tone of the heart monitor, see the panic in a young nurse's eyes, a look he never forgot. That same helplessness pressed against him tonight, as if the past had come unstuck from where he'd hidden it. The image of a face, pale, motionless, drained, swam up in his mind, blurring with the figure in the hall. For a moment, he could not tell the difference between memory and what waited for him in the hospital's living shadows. He tried to shake off the memory, wiping down another counter as his hands trembled. But every time he averted his eyes from the end of the hall, something shifted in the air. The sense of being watched grew sharper, heavier. He turned back, and the pale figure was closer now, standing halfway between where it had first appeared and the spot where he froze. He felt his heart stutter, his breathing shallow. It hadn't made a sound, had barely moved, and yet it closed the distance each time he let his attention drop, inching nearer on a rhythm matched only to his own doubts and fears. The janitor gripped the cart tightly, forcing himself not to look away, not to let darkness slip in again. But it was impossible to watch the figure every second, and when he blinked or looked down or turned to collect his thoughts, he would find it had crept forward by a few more feet. Its eyes, if it even had eyes, locked on him with an intent that felt too knowing, too personal. He realized, slowly and with a rising panic, that it was responding to more than his movement. It followed his thoughts, his memories, everything he was trying so hard to keep out of the light. His decision to leave came fast, fueled by the pounding of his heart and the weight of the pale figure's stare. Rolling his cart behind him, the janitor turned from the morgue and hurried to the nearest door. He stepped through, expecting the familiar stretch of tile and the glow of exit signs guiding him back to busier parts of the hospital. Instead, the hallway bent strangely, stretching longer and twisting oddly, doors now sitting where none had been before. The overhead lights flickered sporadically, changing the length of shadows into crooked lines that seemed to shift direction whenever he moved. He tried to retrace his steps, to find anything he recognized: a clock, a nurse's desk, even the squeak of a far-off gurney. But each direction led only to more confusion, each turn revealing walls warped by angles that made no sense. Even the floor seemed to tilt beneath his feet, making it feel like he was always walking uphill, chasing the same patch of dim light that never grew closer. The hospital was no longer the place he'd cleaned every night. Its familiar pattern was gone, replaced by a winding maze that felt impossible to escape. Behind him, the hush of the morgue door hung open, a silent threat that would not close. He glanced down at his wrist, hoping the steady numbers of his watch would anchor him in something real. But each time his eyes found the face of the watch, the hands spun oddly, the digital numbers blinking and then resetting to 3:12, over and over, no matter how many minutes seemed to pass. Confused, he tapped the glass, then pressed his palm over it, as if simple warmth could fix what felt suddenly, profoundly wrong. Yet nothing changed. Each glance sent time stuttering back to the same cold moment, as if the night refused to move forward. Around him, the silence thickened, broken only by footsteps echoing through endless corridors, sometimes sharp and close, at other times distant and slow. He listened for his own rhythm against the tile, but the echoes multiplied, rolling through the hospital in ways that made him wonder if they even belonged to him. Sometimes, more than one set of steps answered back, perfectly out of sync. The janitor felt dizzy, unmoored from time and place, caught in a loop where each corner and each moment circled back on itself. There was no sense of progress, just endless returning, and the hollow feeling that he would never see the dawn. Desperate for any sense of connection, he hurried to the nearest wall phone, lifted the receiver, and pressed it to his ear. Nothing. No static, no dial tone, only a thick, choking silence buzzing through the line. He tried again with his cell phone, hands shaking so hard he nearly dropped it. The screen glowed, numbers dialed, but each call failed before it even rang. It was as if the hospital had been cut off from the rest of the world, sealed inside an invisible bubble where sound and help could not reach. He moved from phone to phone, each attempt met with deeper silence. He fumbled through his pockets for the radio the staff occasionally used, thumbed the button, and pleaded into the mic. No crackle, no reply. just the faint echo of his own voice bouncing back through the corridors. Even his pager, a stubborn fixture from another decade, blinked lifelessly, never buzzing, never lighting up. The silence pressed harder then, colder and more absolute than before. No matter what he used, every line that once tied him to the outside was gone. The janitor realized in a slow, sinking way that if anyone else was here, they wouldn't hear him. And if he cried out, all that would answer would be the long, hollow echo of his own fear. A sudden bang rattled through the corridor, sharp and violent. A door somewhere down the hall slamming shut with a force that echoed through the empty spaces. The janitor turned, every muscle tensed, and heard another sound just beyond his line of sight. Metal scraping, drawers opening and closing with no hands to move them. The noises came from the morgue, rising in uneven bursts, louder and more insistent than before. It was as if the room itself was trying to speak, each slam and scrape a word in a language meant only for him. Shadows bent and twisted at the edge of the hallway, swelling and retreating in time with the crashing sound. He crept forward, drawn by a terrible need to see if anything, anyone, was really there. The chill from the morgue had deepened, frosting the tile beneath his shoes, making every breath heavy and cold. He could see now that the heavy steel drawers along the far wall slid out and in on their own, some opening just enough to reveal darkness within, others pausing wide as if waiting for something to fill them. The slamming doors made him flinch, but worse was the feeling of presence, the certainty that the pale figure, no longer just a shadow, lingered in the corners of the morgue. Each movement in the room felt deliberate, personal, and full of a lingering anger that seemed to reach straight for him. Panic finally shattered the numbness holding him in place. He darted for the nearest red alarm, yanking it down hard. Once, twice, waiting for sirens or flashing lights, anything to break the spell of silence. Nothing happened. The alarm hung limp, wires sparking faintly, as if drained of all power. He ran for the stairwell, the one route that always led to safety, but when he pushed open the door, he found only another hallway, windowless and identical to the last, looping back on itself no matter which way he turned. Each exit sign he chased dissolved into darkness when he came close. He moved faster, lungs burning, dragging his cart behind him until he finally let it go, abandoned in the emptiness. He pulled at locked doors, pressed elevator buttons until his thumb hurt, but nothing answered back. No rumble of machinery, no escape. Every path he found led either to the morgue, steady and waiting, or to endless twisting corridors that made him feel smaller with every loop. The building itself felt alive now, working against him, shifting and narrowing and closing off any hope of release. It was no longer just the night that trapped him, it was the hospital's memory, its secrets, holding him close and unwilling to let him leave. At last, with every hallway looping back, every door refusing to open, he stood before the morgue one final time. The cold rolled out stronger now, biting at his skin and making his breath hang in the air. His steps echoed like gunshots as he pushed through the open door, swallowed by the sharp smell of antiseptic and frost. The lights inside showed nothing at first, just empty gurneys, the hum of a broken vent, and drawers still half open from before. Then he saw the figure standing in the far corner, pale, motionless, shadow slipping across its feet. It was unmistakably human in shape, but wrong in every other way. The lines of its face blurred, its eyes wide open and shining with a dull, unreadable light. He waited for it to move, to speak, to rush at him in anger or accusation. But the figure did nothing. It simply stood there, watching him with patient, terrifying silence. They faced each other in the icy gloom, the janitor's fear thickening with each second that crawled by. It never reached for him, never spoke his name, but its presence filled the room completely. He realized then that the figure wasn't there for vengeance, but to wait. For what? He could not begin to guess. He shivered, exhaustion and dread bending his knees. The room, the air, and the moment hung frozen, as if the morgue had chosen this as its only truth. He awoke on the cool concrete, blinking against the morning sun. His clothes were stiff and cold, dust clinging to his sleeves and shoes. The hospital towered behind him, its windows reflecting daylight as if nothing strange had ever happened inside. There was no sign of the pale figure, no echo of the endless night. He sat up slowly, every joint aching with exhaustion. People moved past the entrance. Nurses changing shifts, visitors coming and going, none of them noticing the janitor as he pieced together the world around him. The air was clear, but a heavy weight pressed against his chest, a tightness that would not leave. He could not remember how he ended up outside, only that the memory of the hospital's cold and silent halls still haunted his mind. Small flashes returned in broken pieces. The open morgue door, the shadow on the wall, the clock frozen at 3:12. Everything else faded, slipping away like dreams before waking. He tried to tell himself he was safe now, that he had made it out, but even in the bright daylight, a whisper of dread moved along his skin. The hospital was behind him, yet a part of the night refused to let go, leaving him hollow and changed, unsure if the worst was truly over. At home, the janitor tried to settle back into his old routine, doing his best to forget the long night and the cold touch of the morgue shadows. But his body carried reminders he couldn't reason away. Unexplained bruises appeared on his arms and shoulders, faint blue marks that seemed to shift and darken each day, as if fingers had pressed too hard into his skin while he slept. They were sore to the touch, and he covered them with long sleeves, not wanting to answer questions he couldn't bring himself to ask. Still, the aches crept through him, dull and steady, impossible to ignore. Stranger still, he found his hospital ID badge tucked beneath the bathroom sink, cracked and smeared, although he was certain he had left it at work. At night, with the lights out, he heard whispers threading through the silence, a voice that pressed against his ear, calling his name as gently as a breath. The sound was neither dream nor nightmare, but something waiting between both, impossible to escape. He lay awake, eyes on the ceiling, heart hammering, knowing that the true haunting had followed him home. In the hush, the fear returned, patient and quiet, never really gone at all.